Joining us now, former Obama Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs, Joel Rubin. Joel, good morning. Wonderful to see
Casey.
you. So this issue, of course, before war broke out between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, this was obviously a very emotionally charged and difficult issue, the settlers in the West Bank. It seems now that some of these leaders in Israel on the right are seeing Trump's election as an opportunity to continue to push forward here. Do you think that that's a realistic possibility with Donald Trump in the White House? And do you think it's in Israel's interest?
Well, on the first question, I do think it's a real possibility with Donald Trump in the White House, because we've seen already when President Trump was in his first term, he enabled a variety of far-right measures to go forward in Israel, such as endorsing the Golan Heights annexation, which is under Israeli law, but not internationally recognized, and a variety of other items that were on the wish list of Bibi Netanyahu. And so, yes, absolutely, there's no reason to think otherwise. Is it in Israel's long-term interest? Well, much of it depends on how the region reacts. Saudi Arabia is very hostile to this idea, but how hostile? Are they willing to hold up an agreement with Israel and not have normalization? Or are they willing to allow for some moderation on the West Bank? But, you know, in Israeli politics, I got to say, right now, calling for a two-state solution is just not on the table across the board. And so that gives a lot of political space for Netanyahu to have his far-right minister go out and publicly say something that they have not really pushed hard in the politics of Israel.
Yeah. Joel, we did see relatively early in the conflict between Israel and Hamas, Donald Trump makes some comments that I think may have raised some eyebrows. He and Netanyahu kind of went at Netanyahu a little bit, and has also said, he's basically suggested that Netanyahu has gone too far, that Israel has an image problem, which is, of course, often how Donald Trump is known to think about things as the reality television star that he once was. What do you think that means, if anything? Because perhaps you think it's irrelevant, but what does that mean for what Netanyahu will need to do with Trump in office in terms of Gaza?
I don't think it means much.
Okay.
I think that Trump was using this for a little bait and switch electorally to convince voters, particularly in Michigan and amongst the progressive base, that somehow he was going to lean on Israel and push Israel to stop its war in Gaza. If anything, he's going to give more of a green light to the prime minister than President Biden. He's not going to advocate for a two-state solution, which is where Vice President Harris was on the campaign trail. And I think that for the prime minister, he already has had multiple calls with Donald Trump since the election, and they're going to walk hand in glove on these issues. You're not going to see much difference between the two.
How do you think Jared Kushner plays into all of this? Because he obviously was part of the Abraham Accords. There's no indication that he and Ivanka are going to come back to Washington at this point, but fascinating, right? I
mean, you know, he was the orchestrator of the Abraham Accords, and he is clearly still very much part of the inner circle, even if he's not an official. This question of Saudi Arabia is the key question. What will they demand of Israel if they're going to get a normalization agreement with Israel, which clearly the Israelis want, and the Saudis do to a certain extent as well? And are they going to demand what the UAE demanded several years ago, which was no annexation? That was the sort of detente that they had on the question of annexation. Don't go too far, and we'll give you normalization. Is that also what Saudi's going to ask for? And clearly, Kushner is going to have a role in that.
Is it possible to do this normalization pact while this war still rages in Gaza?
For the Saudis, the political environment is not favorable to that, but we may see very well some type of gift after inauguration of Prime Minister Netanyahu to show that, yes, Donald Trump is delivering on a cessation of violence. Now that he's in office, we may see Israel pull back to show a bit of a gift and then move in the direction towards Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. And finally, we're reporting here that Marco Rubio likely to be offered the Secretary of State job. You served in the State Department. What does it say to you? I mean, he obviously, they were rivals in 2016, but Rubio has earned the respect of many in the foreign policy establishment.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's a highly trained, highly qualified senator, knows the issues very well. He's a hawk. He comes in with a very strong view of China, of Iran. He's going to be very aggressive, but he's a highly qualified nominee, and I think we're going to see a real strong rhetoric coming out of him as Secretary of State, if he's confirmed, which he likely will be, on the issues of Iran and China in particular.
The Senate does typically like to confirm their own to these posts without very much trouble. Joel Rubin, thank you. I really appreciate it.